Welcome back to the news, everybody. Honestly, today we've got some really damn rough news. We went through all the reporting, and ultimately for Bungie, things are looking really bad. There's also a broader context surrounding Sony themselves. They did this whole big push into live services, right? But Jim Ryan is gone. It seems like not all of those plans have actually went particularly well. Today, though, my focus is going to be on what's happening with Bungie. So, here's the deal. 16 months ago, Bungie were acquired by Sony. And before that, the leadership of Bungie actually stressed to their staff that this deal would result in no layoffs, right? So that they wouldn't be, trimming the company down. So it's a sort of a juicier item to be snapped up by Sony. And in fact, the higher-ups at Bungie were so concerned about staff being worried about retention that they said they negotiated $1.2 billion, which is 1/3 of the value of their entire deal, as a part of the contract devoted solely to keeping staff around with payments to employee shareholders. So yes, absolutely, that did not last. And I'm not bringing this up to try to catch them in some sort of bind or anything. Obviously, things can change, and that really is the point. Things have evidently changed materially since when that promise was made, because on the 30th of October, we started to see Bungie staff posting on social media that their jobs were being terminated immediately. And the first that we saw was the Destiny 2 community manager and co-lead of accessibility, Liana Rupert, who made her post saying, well, my heart is breaking for all affected. I'm now looking for opportunities. And of course, as the day rolled on, we saw more, and we saw it in engineering, recruitment, HR, art teams, visual design, player support, QA, community management. Basically, the entire company has experienced a reduction in force. And the sneaky thing here is that for QA, one member of the team dedicated to quality assurance for Armor and Expressions actually reported that their team no longer exists, that it just has wholesale been removed. And it really is a mix of everyone. We've seen people who've been at the company for 6 years alongside people who've only been picked up since the acquisition happened. Of course, you'll likely remember whenever all the really bad Activision Blizzard press was going on, you saw so many people at Bungie recruiting people saying, hey, we have positions open, we treat people well, we've got work from home, it's all good, come over to Bungie. And then one move that really did surprise a lot of players, mostly I think because of just seniority and a sort of degree of impact on titles, is Michael Salvatore. Yes, he'd actually been on the team at Bungie since 1997 and is reported to have been let go. Basically, he updated his website and now says gone fishing. Yeah, which is rough. Then Michael Seacrest, another composer at Bungie, revealed that he had suffered the same fate as well. So certainly for players, like they heard about this first from a community manager, now they're seeing Michael Salvatore, an absolutely massive name in games music, someone whose music people have been listening to for years and years and years as they've played these games. That is going to hit players fairly strongly. Now, the way that these were done also stung. This is per Paul Tassi sources at the company. Some people found out on Monday morning when they found out they just couldn't log into their email. Some staff were actually told in meetings that they could not talk to anybody else about it and basically couldn't say their goodbyes. Many team managers were actually not told who was being laid off. They only found out as it happened. And then staff, well, they will be getting their health insurance benefits through to the end of their 3-month severance, but the other benefits have actually stopped. And here's the bit that is particularly disgusting. Any non-vested shares held by staff will be void as of next month unless cashed out now, which, yes, I suppose does mean everyone will be cashing that out immediately. Certainly it would be pretty horrible to think if somebody was not able to cash those out. As a tactic, that obviously is absolutely horrible. Those stock options in many cases can actually be a fairly large part of somebody's compensation, especially of course because, hey, game industry, a lot of people do happen to be located in pretty expensive areas. And as bad as all this is right now, apparently this has actually been going on a little bit in a quiet way with QA, because per IGN sources, there were dismissals from QA over the last few months, enough that Bungie's head of quality assurance basically felt that they needed to actually deny that there were rolling layoffs, saying, if we ever did layoffs, we would be very upfront about it. Obviously, that person was not in the loop. And as this happened, there was apparently a crackdown on QA getting just more pressure, more scrutiny, that sort of thing. And currently Bungie leadership have attempted to obfuscate the total staff losses while then encouraging team members to not talk about this in internal channels. Then, in an internal town hall after the layoffs happened, Pete Parsons, who's the CEO of Bungie, basically said, listen, this is not a Sony thing, this is a Bungie thing, and broadly, it's because of Destiny 2's performance this year. And he told staff that, quote, the right people had been retained to continue work on Destiny 2. Of course, that is not a great use of words. It's saying that, say, Salvatore, wrong person. Just to name one person that people would sort of know the name of, you go through everybody who went. Sort of the implication of what Parsons said is that, yes, the right people are here remaining, which means that the right people are the ones who went. That is obviously rough. Now, if the intention is to say, we can still do this with what we have right now, that's a reasonable thing to say. That particular phrasing of the right people, that definitely does rub the wrong way. Now, publicly through the process, there was no sort of official press release on this, no proper statement detailing the number of layoffs or really anything like that. We did see, of course, from Pete's personal Twitter, though, where he said, today's a sad day at Bungie where we say goodbye to colleagues who've all made a significant impact on the studio. He keeps on going, he says they're all truly talented people, but, you know, perhaps not the right people, considering they were expendable. If you have any openings, I would highly recommend each and every one of them. So obviously, Pete got quite a lot of flack from that. Obviously, layoffs are never an easy thing. They're not an easy thing to do. It does not, however, seem that this went down in the best way that it could for a company like Bungie, who you absolutely would expect to have the resources to not really do this in a way that is such a shit show. Now, before I go on to the other sort of big scoop of information, I will say I wouldn't exactly say sources, more just like people I know, like industry people, right? And obviously we chat from time to time about the comings and goings of the industry. I have heard a few offhand remarks that pretty much boil down to Bungie is a shit show. And this isn't random people, this is definitely people who would know. So whenever I heard those remarks initially, I thought, that feels weird, right? I mean, Bungie, they're fairly successful. They've been doing the live service game for a long, long time. They keep on, tweeting and talking about their good work culture, all of that, the work from home. They were sort of trying to contrast themselves against Blizzard and all that story was going on. I wonder what's really going on. And I suppose now, when I think back to some of those conversations I had with people where they said, yeah, Bungie, total shit show what's going on there. I mean, yeah, it does actually seem that they were right. As for the what here, well, Jason Schreier confirmed 8% of the company, a total of 100 people, were laid off. But the key thing is that this layoff actually followed recently executives saying to their staff that Destiny revenue was down 45% below the target for that year. This was blamed heavily on player retention, dropping from the poor reception of Lightfall. Of course, you have seen us talk about Lightfall. What is fairly interesting then is we know that the Destiny team tracks all this stuff fairly closely. That's from that GDC talking their live service model. To take a look here, we can see vocal sentiment. Now, unfortunately, the actuals in the forecast, these are all redacted. We don't see the actual numbers, but we do see some of those percentage changes. But what do you see here? Well, expansion revenue, microtransaction revenue, average revenue per daily active user, and then also, the average daily active users, vocal sentiment, all of that stuff. So they track all of this, and evidently, those numbers have all looked rather shocking. I think the question then is, the benchmarks for this year, what were those benchmarks based off? Were they just saying, hey, this is going to be Witch Queen and slap on a little bit of growth? Or were these numbers that themselves did sort of know, in what was projected, that Lightfall was not really going to be a particularly good expansion? Ultimately, then, this is the sort of thing that was being flagged internally a lot. You've got multiple components to this. It's not just the quality of Lightfall, although the quality of Lightfall was a fairly major one. Even you just think about the big cinematic trailer that they really tried to hype people with for Lightfall, and the very end of Lightfall is basically just like the other bit of that trailer playing. And I get that could be a cute way of doing your narrative, but the overarching point is, it felt like a bunch of unwelcome filler that just wasn't interesting at all. You then compound on that the vaulting of content, then the numerous technical issues that they've faced in that game that have made playing it frustrating, and you can see all of this not going well. So ultimately, two things have happened. Number one, cost cutting. This is them cutting costs on things like salary, hiring freezes, travel expenses, and then Destiny 2 The Final Shape has been delayed until June 2024 from February to get feedback from good to great. Because yes, its feedback was good, but not great. That is what we heard from these sources. As you can imagine, like, with a game like this, you're really dealing with the sort of end of the first big chapter. I suppose one thing people think about right now, and maybe the people at Marvel are, is after Avengers Endgame happened, it really seems that a lot of people just decided to dip out and just not really bother with it anymore. People wandered away at that natural leaving point. And of course, Infinity War and Endgame were pretty well-received movies. I just think about this. If you have Final Shape, the natural place to end, following from Lightfall, and it went from like shit to okay, that would obviously be a bullet in the back of the head of Destiny 2, as far as I'm concerned. This is also quite interesting because the Final Shape was supposed to mark the shift from Destiny's seasonal model to an episodic model, right? So we'll have to see how that actually pans out. But then, of course, on top of that, this delay does mean that the final season of the current expansion, Lightfall, is obviously going to be stuck there for a little bit longer. Now, despite all of this, per Bloomberg's sources, staff at the meeting, basically left feeling determined, right? They actually felt galvanized, like, okay, shit, our numbers are down, we have a mission to do. That's exactly the incentive and the attitude that you need to make a comeback like this happen. To then, though, have the layoffs happen, well, you would wonder if it would take a little bit of the spirit out of that sentiment, which I think is something that Destiny players should actually be quite worried about, because at the end of the day, the game is made by people, and if they got very, very motivated to fix the problem and then got suddenly demotivated, that's going to be rough. Now, per Paul Tassi, every part of the process here is a decision made by Bungie. Who was laid off? How it was announced, how was it handled, basically all their fault. As a part of the Bloomberg report, many of the studio support departments were also heavily impacted. This means QA, community management, and they will apparently be replaced, right, by outsourced labor going forward. So basically that means you are finding a cheaper way to do it, right? This is all rough, but is this actually sharing a rough position the PlayStation themselves are in? And I think the answer there is actually yes. Here's one of the final things in the Bloomberg report. The layoffs are part of a larger money-saving initiative at Sony's PlayStation unit. Media Molecule faced 20 layoffs, 14% of their previous headcount, as reported by GLHF. Then, the teams at PlayStation's Visual Arts PSVA group are also reporting departures that are because of layoffs and the non-renewal of contracts per VGC. Now, 5 months ago, there were actually reports of layoffs at PSVA as a result of, quote, a large pivot on a AAA multiplayer game, and that led to the restructuring. Now, this Visual Arts division, they basically support other PlayStation studios on like structural requirements and like development for the visual side of titles. So basically, this is a studio that's supposed to have a lot of in-house experience that can move between the various different Sony studios and basically help them get the best visuals out of the PS5 that is possible. And really, that's where things start to get concerning. So I've got to talk about the live services. They have been very much making this gambit heavy into live services. I think Jim Ryan announced it. Basically, right, they've had Haven Studios' Fair Game, Bungie's Marathon, Firewalk's Concord, all of these first-party live service games. And this was all part of their attempt to meet this lovely, beautiful graph by 2025, having 12 live service games in total. Now, you can see fiscal year 22, 3, fiscal year 23, 6. So here's the thing, we're approaching the halfway point of fiscal year 23, and I don't know about you, but as far as I can tell, we've got Destiny, MLB The Show, and that's actually it. Which means that these projections are absolutely not holding up. Now, this has potentially resulted in a flashpoint earlier this month, as seen in the departure of the long long-term PlayStation veteran, Connie Booth. Now, she was the senior vice president and head of internal production at PlayStation. She obviously had a hand in many of their larger series, and Sony gave this statement saying that she helped, drive their success, talked about her passion and all of that, so just waffly talk, of course. But what they did not confirm was unverified reports from the ex-Sony alumni, David Jaffe, that she had been fired as a part of an internal pushback against live service games production. So that certainly is suspicious, perhaps a little bit worrying. I mean, also, come on, live services, there are so many of them. How can you possibly keep up? A lot of people were very suspicious when they heard Sony talking about this anyway, so clearly a lot of people within Sony would have been as well. I'm just going to read a little bit from Jason Schreier's newsletter because I think it's relevant here. Sony's stable of game studios such as Naughty Dog, Insomniac, and Guerrilla Games have also been working on multiplayer service games with mixed levels of success. Most have not been revealed yet. Some insiders are worried about the company's lack of a coherent vision with its seemingly misplaced bets on live service games, niche VR headsets, and a baffling machine called PlayStation Portal that allows people to play PS5 games on the go, but only if they are being streamed from your home PS5 via Wi-Fi. There certainly have been head scratchers recently. Clearly then, it's looking like quite a few bets are just not paying off. They are doing nonsensical things, and it seems that layoffs are the obvious result of that. Now, Bungie being owned by PlayStation means we don't really see any of Bungie's financials, right? But when you look at the Game and Network Services segment from Sony's Q1 financial statements, we can see that they've had an overall operating income drop of 3.6 billion yen in Q1. While they were still actively increasing projected forecasts for the segment through the end of fiscal year 2023. You've got the purchase of Bungie, of course, in 2022, which is one of the things that brought down their operating income because they just spent all of that money. But basically, they were still hoping to increase numbers, and Destiny was already a cost last year. And so this makes us think, right? We have these projections that perhaps we're assuming are not going to be met. I mean, come on, look at the 45% drop in sales for Destiny 2. Now, Sony's next financial report is on the 9th of November, very soon actually, and that will detail all of their financials up to the end of the month of September this year. Obviously, we do not know what those results are going to be. Thing is, though, if you happen to be a publicly traded company and you want to project some fiduciary responsibility and some flexibility to your shareholders and your investors, what will you want to do? You will want to be seen to be decreasing your overheads, which obviously means reducing the number of staff. And so the point basically is, if you've had to take a bit of a loss, you're immediately seen to be trying to counteract that loss. Of course, this is existing in a world where it's all about what's going on next quarter, or at most next fiscal year, and not really the long-term picture. Because ultimately, from the shareholder perspective, they're not making all the money. I mean, sure, you've got Spider-Man 2, that's fantastic, but that's not bringing in live service revenue to combat all of your increased operating costs, all of these apparent live service games that they probably sunk many millions into that have just kind of, all went poof and disappeared a little bit. Or at least have been kicked back on the schedule, as we have continually heard. Of course, remember those reports about The Last of Us Part 2, sort of multiplayer live service game, pretty much being reworked again and again, and Bungie allegedly, not being particularly happy, Bungie speaking as live service experts, with the state of it, right? So basically, you got bad news. Well, what happens if you tell all your subsidiaries to reduce their cost by 10%, then, that'll happen. And then the problem is they'll reduce their budget. So if there's a team and you just simply are almost like removing a line item, then your overall profit number just goes up because you've reduced all of those expenses. And that can lead to situations where people with tenure are seen as a large expense rather than a large wealth of experience that is invaluable to your company, which, is the thing that is supposed to justify them being decently expensive. And in many cases, right, recruitment, community managers, player-facing staff, those are the people who are not as directly making the product that is being sold. Therefore, they are seen as easy cuts, especially if the company then thinks they can outsource a part of that role. This is the sort of thing that is absolutely mercenary and absolutely consistent with what we're seeing go on across the industry. Now look, if layoffs need to happen because the numbers aren't adding up to the degree where you're like, hey, we don't have enough runway to actually make this happen, or we are too large for what we can possibly do right now, this isn't going to make sense. that is, that sort of thing is okay and reasonable. Where people get, I think, particularly angry is cases where it kind of looks like this. It kind of looks like, oh, I see your operating income's like down a little bit. Okay, remove a bunch of people. Look, number go up, or at least the number gets cushioned as it falls down. Not really something that is tied to the 2 or 5 year performance of the company. The sort of thing that just feels like it's done, reacting to a quarter. That is what feels purely just crass and disgusting about this sort of thing that's going on. This will not be the end. This is happening everywhere. I've even seen some initial noises of a similar thing happening at Insomniac, which again would be crazy if true, but again would also be consistent, just saying, hello, your expenses are going down 10%, say goodbye to your people. So man, there you go. That's the situation. I'd say if I was a player of Destiny, I'd certainly feeling rather grim right now. And Marathon, sure, that might be cool, but A, that's in 2025. B, are people even going to be that interested in Marathon if the track record ends up going in the pretty mixed, pretty messy direction that it's been going in with the likes of Destiny? Absolutely brutal stuff. And remember, Destiny is the game where we've seen, all of the stuff about getting like the sort of god rolls for your guns, like that being monetized a bit. You've got, I get paid cosmetics, but the degree to which they do that shit in Destiny is insane. And we did a video on the monetization of that game recently. You've got your almost like little battle pass inside the battle pass, which is mad. If you buy a season, it doesn't include the dungeon, or whatever it is. So many things that they do where Destiny is just crazy. And you see, here's the thing. If Destiny was just like, hey, Destiny costs this amount a month, it's a subscription, go, people would maybe be more okay with it. But the way that they execute on the business model of Destiny just makes people feel nickel and dimed. And certainly if people feel nickel and dimed, but then they see all this going bad, people are absolutely going to have no hope for the future, and that is rough. So let me know what your thoughts are down in the comments. Thanks for tuning in, and man, hopefully we've got better news soon.